Hi everyone, I'm your host Katie Watson from Secon, and thank you for taking the time today to join us for our webinar, Vulnerability Remediation in the Age of AI. David, if you're able to change the slide, please.
There we
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David, as well as being our amazing host today, is also helping me out with my slides. So if this is your first time attending a Secon session, welcome. At Secon, we work closely with organizations to bring clarity to cybersecurity, helping you to focus on what matters, block out the noise, and make more confident human-led decisions in a very fast-moving threat environment. We chose this topic, AI and vulnerability remediation, because it's something we're hearing a lot about from clients and security leaders. There's been a noticeable shift in AI. It's not a future concern anymore. It's already being used by attackers to accelerate exploitation, targeting known vulnerabilities faster than teams can respond. And it raises an important question for us all. If attackers are using AI to move faster, how should we respond? Because traditional patching cycles, while important, are no longer enough on their own. And prioritizing based on CVSS scores and spreadsheets, it just doesn't cut it in this kind of environment. And that is what today is all about. We are going to explore how AI is being used in the real world. We're going to look at why current remediation process often create delays today, and what a smarter AI-supported remediation practice could look like. We're very lucky today to be joined by David Gray, Solutions Architect Team Lead at Vicarius, and someone with more than 20 years of hands-on cybersecurity experience. David has worked across technical teams across the UK and understands both the theory and practical challenges of risk-based remediation. So we are in store for a very good webinar. To get an idea of where we're all at with our strategies, I've got a quick poll that you feel free to answer as we go through some housekeeping slides. Next slide, please, David. Thank you so much.
That's
So
okay.
just some housekeeping before we begin. The session will be around 45 minutes long with time for questions at the end. Throughout the entire webinar, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box. The more we get, the more we'll go through. And if we don't get a chance to go through your question, or like me, you think of it at the end of the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me at katie.watson@seconcyber.com. The session is being recorded, so afterwards we'll send you a link. And finally, we'll have a short feedback form at the end of the session, so we do really appreciate your input. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David to take us through AI and vulnerability remediation.
Thanks, Katie. So if you just bear with me a moment while I bring up the correct tab, and I'll get that. So yeah, as Katie says, so I'm Solution Architect Team Lead with Vicarius. So I've been working with Vicarius now for a couple of years and working with customers all across Europe. I have many years experience in lots of different areas of cybersecurity. So the AI aspects of things, it's interesting. It's new, or not so new anymore, but certainly an area that is growing in the news and is more and more important in terms of how we actually go about addressing things in terms of security. So what I'm aiming to do today is, and please do ask any questions as we go on. Katie will be monitoring so that we can cover those off, and we can either cover them off as we go through the session or towards the end. Now, what I'm aiming to do today is really looking at going through a few different areas. So it's looking at understanding what's the current state, what's the current market state and the trends that we're seeing. So there's some interesting trends that we've seen certainly over the last few years in terms of vulnerabilities and management and how to address those. I'll have a little more of a delve and a look into how we approach things today and what today's answers are, and therefore what some of the challenges are. Moving forward, I'll then have a look at some of the concerns and the challenges that we see around the AI-based attacks and what they look like. What does that mean in terms of defending and preventing those attacks? So how do we address that in terms of remediation? What can we do to prevent that? And then, if time permits, I'll also do a very brief demo of the platform as is. Now, the first challenge that we actually have, it's very much down to people. People are always a problem when we're talking cybersecurity. I think everybody's seen on LinkedIn, there's always huge shortages in terms of positions, or plenty of positions to be filled, shortages in terms of people to fill those positions. So 2023, we were talking about almost 4 million positions. We were looking at a gap for cybersecurity engineers, almost 4 million. 2024, almost 5 million. So that number is only going to increase, and by the end of this year, I fully expect that that'll be a much larger number. Now, that's all very well. So we've got a gap there in terms of the positions and the numbers of people that you're looking for. But then, even if you do fill the position, does it mean that you've got somebody who has the skill sets and the knowledge and the ability to address the requirements? So do they understand how to prevent security attacks, how to remediate? It takes time to embed and bring on new team members to have that security and to have them understanding the business and how you need to prevent those attacks and mitigate any risks. Then on top of that, you have the challenge of the vulnerabilities, the number of vulnerabilities. So I think, again, this is no real secret. It's something that we see every day all over LinkedIn again, and just see the numbers when you're looking at vulnerabilities, that we've got huge numbers of vulnerabilities being published on a regular basis. And it's almost going up exponentially. So 2023, we're talking about 30,000 vulnerabilities over the course of the year. The end of last year, 2024, almost 40,000. So we're steadily increasing the number of vulnerabilities that are being identified and being published. So it's likely to be, now we're looking at round about 4,000 to 5,000 vulnerabilities that we're publishing every month. So the question there is understanding, are they relevant? Are they not relevant? It's the numbers, it's really nigh on impossible for anyone to actually manage and understand. Certainly when you combine that with the number of people or the lack of people, it really means that there has to be some way to automate the management of the securing, the remediation, managing the vulnerabilities, managing what we're looking at in an automated way. And logically, of course, this means managing it through some kind of AI. How do we make sure that it's directly associated and with your business and business risks as they pertain to you, rather than just generic across the industry? So these are a couple of the real challenges that we see. But then overlaid on that, we have the increase in vulnerabilities. But this is matched by the increase of the proof of concept exploits that we're seeing, that we're through a partner that we work with, VulnCheck, that we're seeing proof of concept exploits. And you can see the numbers massively increasing, certainly over the past couple of years. There was a big jump, and then prior to that we had an increase. But then if we look at the known exploited vulnerabilities, the trend that we're looking at there is very much an exponential increase. This means that while we've got the increase in vulnerabilities, we're seeing the increase in vulnerabilities, we're also seeing an increase in known exploited vulnerabilities. So we have proof that those numbers of vulnerabilities are also being exploited. So it's a real concern. how do we manage it? That is really what we're looking at in terms of the real challenges. And then there's actually other things that we see as challenges. So we have different products that you're using to potentially assess issues. You're using different tools to prioritize those issues. We then have different tools that you would be using to maybe script and to remediate and mitigate. We have different tools that you might use for patching. You've got different platforms that you're running. You've got Windows, you've got Mac, you've got Linux. We've got all of these different solutions that you are running. So this, again, in terms of training, staff training, it's keeping up to speed and ensuring that staff have full visibility and full knowledge of the products is really, really difficult. Ensuring that you have, or ensuring that you actually have the solutions, the licensing costs, that's a financial cost. And in terms of the use, the training, how quickly can you use the tools to actually remediate and to fix the problems? So that's really the current status of what we're looking at and the general approach or the general challenges that we're seeing. So in terms of the approach, it is using these multiple solutions. Now, there are other ways that we can look at that. So we Vicarius have a platform, VRX, that we are looking to use as continuous threat exposure management. So essentially what we're looking to do is we're looking to consolidate all of those challenges, taking the assessment, so understanding what vulnerabilities we have within the environment, to understand whether they're relevant. Are they not? Are they relevant? Are they not relevant? We also need to provide and have real-time visibility. So traditional tools, if we go back to one of the previous slides, you've got your vulnerability assessment tool. Traditionally, you would have a point in time scan, but we need a more dynamic, more continuous approach to continually understand what vulnerabilities do we have in the environment. Again, if we look at the numbers of the vulnerabilities, they're increasing rapidly. There's constant publishing of vulnerabilities. You've got to have a more real-time, a more constant view of those vulnerabilities. Then we also need to understand, in addition to whether they're relevant or not, what's the actual priority. So yes, we have vulnerabilities. Yes, we have a common vulnerability score. Does that mean it's relevant or high priority to me? Maybe, maybe not. So we need a mechanism to understand what's the levels of risk, what's the exposure, and again we need a mechanism to be able to understand that for your unique environment. Everybody has a different setup, so what's relevant for you may not be relevant for me, and vice versa. So we need that approach to understand not just the threat exposure, so not just continuous threat exposure management and identify the threats, but how do we remediate? How do we do that continuous threat exposure remediation? And that's where we can bring in other mechanisms. So this is where we're talking about potentially about patching. So we're applying patches on an ongoing basis, so we know that we've got that coverage on a regular scheduled automated basis. Where we may have other items that need perhaps configuration changes, again we need to ensure that that's happening on an ongoing basis. So this is where we're talking about the continuous threat exposure remediation. It's the remediation is key. It's all very well having visibility, but what do we actually do about the problem? That's really the challenge. Now, as you'll see in some slides that I'm going to talk about later, is this basically the problem is the gap, the time between vulnerability identified, the time between vulnerability remediated. And that's what we see is getting a narrower and narrower gap. So that's coming down from months to exploitation, to weeks, to days. And I think we can all see where that's headed, that it's just going to get quicker and quicker to be exploited. So we need a mechanism to remediate on a faster and more automated basis. So we at Vicarius, with the platform VRX, we manage this today on the approach of providing that real-time visibility. So we provide that approach through an analysis that we look to analyze any endpoints to understand what applications are you running? What's the operating system? We're looking across the board for common applications as well as more specialist applications. And the way we do it is we have an agent. So we're looking to use that agent basically to provide real-time visibility. So when the vulnerabilities are published, you know within minutes whether those vulnerabilities are relevant to you or whether they're not relevant to you. So rather than re-scanning with the more traditional tools, we're providing that real-time visibility. What we're also doing is we're providing an inventory, so you can see what have I got? What's my estate look like? What applications do we have installed? And this is across all sorts of different applications, whether niche bespoke applications or mainstream applications. And invariably, we do find that everybody knows that they've got, let's say, the Microsoft Office suite, they've got Chrome, but do they know who's got PuTTY installed or Notepad++? Do they manage those other applications? So we need a mechanism to gain visibility into those other applications. And we also use this to provide visibility into the vulnerabilities that are relevant to those applications, and patches that might be outstanding, any other patches that we might need to apply to those applications or the operating system. We also look at potential other weaknesses. So we analyze to understand other weaknesses that may exist within the applications and the libraries. So we perform a common weakness enumeration to identify certain types of vulnerabilities. So we're looking not only at the published, but we're looking at other unpublished weaknesses that attackers might be able to take advantage of. Once we've got all of this information, we then perform the prioritization. So we're looking to do this on a contextual basis. So we're looking to understand not only what the vulnerabilities, what the CVE common vulnerability score is, we're looking to understand how is the application actually used. So we use some threat information feeds. So we're looking to understand, do we have actively exploited vulnerabilities? So again, we've seen that the active exploited vulnerability numbers is increasing. So we can identify, do we have known exploited vulnerabilities within the environment, allowing you to really focus in on the more risky applications. We're also looking at how the applications are used, so whether they're active on the network, whether they need admin rights, whether they are frequently used or infrequently used, are they end of life? So we're looking at lots of different information that we use to assist with the prioritization process, to effectively sift through the noise of, rather than a long list of CVEs, we're helping to sift through that to prioritize into high risk, medium risk and low risk the applications, so that you can really focus where you can have the most effect. And that risk scoring assists with workload reduction. So it's simplifying day-to-day management of those vulnerabilities and the risks by prioritizing, by performing that risk scoring. And then the third thing that we do is we provide that key remediation approach. So it's not only the here's a load of problems, here's a load of vulnerabilities. It's also, and here's how you can fix them. So we're saying we have a few different approaches here. We can apply patches. So this is typically, obviously, the common way to remediate the largest proportion of vulnerabilities. So we can automate the patching of operating systems, of applications, and that's across Windows, Mac, and Linux, and that's looking at a large library of applications. So, as I say, things like, let's say, Notepad++ or Putty or the Microsoft Office suite or your web browsers. So we can automate that. So this is the first stage in reducing that time to exposure, that we can automate and apply patches on a regular, ongoing basis, whether it's a bank holiday, whether you're in the office, whether it's the middle of the night, whether it's the weekend. We know that those patches are getting applied on a regular, recurring basis. We then have an approach for dealing with some of these unknown weaknesses, which we call virtual patching. And this effectively, it's acting like a firewall, an application, an API gateway. So it's protecting an application in memory. So if you have legacy applications that no longer supported by the vendor, perhaps, or you have specialist applications that we maybe need to put some extra security around, we can protect those applications. Certainly in terms of legacy applications, this is probably one of the commonest use cases that we have for customers, where you've got those business critical applications that you need to keep running, but you don't have any ongoing support, or rather the vendor may no longer be releasing patches. And this is typically the most common that we see for virtual patching, is to protect those applications and reduce risk. The third approach we have is very much focused around scripting. So this is more for configuration type vulnerabilities, where we're looking at maybe registry changes or configuration changes. And we can run this on a manual basis, or we can, again, run these on an automated basis, so that we can easily ensure that any systems that require these fixes have the fixes put in place. So that's really what we're looking at today, and this is the general approach. So it's the automation, it's the prioritization and the analysis on an ongoing basis. Now, where we really see things moving towards is very much towards AI powered exploits. So that's the first side of it, that we're going to see the attackers using AI. Now, this, I think, it's to be honest with you, it's really, really close, if not already happening. So certainly we have seen, for example, using GPT-4, we have seen the creation of exploits just from reading a CVE advisory. So these CVE advisories, they are available for anybody and everybody to read. So all it takes is some scraping of that data to very easily start producing a large volume of exploits just from reading those advisories, just from feeding them in to the LLM. That's kind of a scary thought. And as we say on the slide here, that was then, after that, it was then exploiting successfully 87% of tested vulnerabilities. That's quite a scary number. So if we're taking these exploits, simply feeding them into an LLM and then generating exploits, and that was almost 90% successful, that's something that we really need to sit up and pay attention to. And it's not just looking at past vulnerabilities. These are brand new vulnerabilities as well. So it's not just legacy things that there's lots of information about. This is new vulnerabilities as they're coming out. So this really raises a lot of concern around what the attackers may do in terms of automating this process. So, for example, it was just 2 weeks ago, I was just looking to prepare for this webinar, and the BBC 2 weeks ago had an article, and they said there hasn't been an AI related breach yet, just a matter of time. So it's everybody's seeing this, looks like it's happening. So what this means is, because the attackers are using this approach, how do we as defenders, preventers, security, how do we prevent that? So it really starts to mean that we potentially need a mind shift in how we approach this, because right now I think we're all doing this on a manual basis. It's people operated. Even where we're talking about the automations and the scheduling, that is, yes, it's automated, but ultimately we decide the scheduling. We decide we're going to apply patches once a week. Is that enough? Once a day, is that enough? Who knows? Because basically what this means is, as I was saying earlier, you've got the time to exploit the vulnerabilities moving from months to weeks to days. Where does that go? Is that going to come from minutes or even seconds? That's the challenge that we're up against. And the patching, yes, I know a lot of people can patch critical vulnerabilities within, let's say, 2 weeks. This probably won't be fast enough. And if you think, if some of you have been around for long enough, certainly I remember Blaster and SQL Slammer from way back when. What year is it? So around about 2002 to 2003. So Katie, I suspect you won't remember that. But if you think back to that and the way they spread around the world very, very quickly, that's the speeds we're talking about. Getting the patches out to avoid that kind of scenario. Now, the 2 weeks, yes, it's a requirement for Cyber Essentials Plus, for critical and high. So first of all, 2 weeks, is that quick enough? For now, it's kind of okay. But that's only mandated by Cyber Essentials for critical and high. What we are seeing is we're also seeing hackers moving towards lower criticality vulnerabilities because they're less likely to be patched. Cyber Essentials says critical and high. So as an attacker, would you go for a low and a medium? Because they're less likely to be seen and patched. So that's a trend that we're also seeing, that we're seeing not just the critical and high being targeted because they're easy, but the medium and low because they're less obvious. So this, again, this is something to be aware of. Now, the challenge that we have, of course, if we start to look to move towards an AI remediation approach, it does come down to trust. So how do we, as the systems administrators, how do we trust that what this system is doing, do we want to allow it to go and make these decisions to do things autonomously and independently? So it's really going to take a little time, because I've been around for long enough that I've seen the differences between IDS and IPS. Very few people turn on IPS for blocking. It's very often a checkbox exercise. So how do we trust that these machines are going to be doing what we want them to? It's basically going to take time and build up that trust. So the general approach will be that we will be looking at AI generated policies, for example, and processes. We then need to vet them and say, yes, tick, this will work. That's fine in the short term. But again, if we're seeing the time to exploit coming down and down, you're still dependent on the AI. So the midterm, we should be able to generate and define more complex policies, focused really on reducing the impact to the business. So it's understanding other things outside the vulnerability, for example, and the patching. So it's taking that and extending it on a slightly larger scale. On a longer term, we need to have more dynamic policies. So they need to be more dynamic in terms of they need to change as situations require, as types of attack change, and it's got to be in an orchestrated manner across potentially across multiple sets of tools. So orchestrating across not only a patching, a remediation, scripting tool, but also maybe an EDR, an NDR, network access control, firewalls, across all of these different tools in a much more coordinated manner. But the trust has to be there before we can really get to that stage. It's all about, in terms of being effective, is reducing the attack surface, and that's got to be at scale. So that's got to be internally, externally. It's got to be the applications, it's the operating system, exposed services, hardware, software. It's looking at, on a bigger scale about reducing the attack surface, and that's one of the challenges, one of the other challenges. And patching is not the only approach. So it will require diverse fixing of different elements, as I've referred to, maybe firewalls, IPSs, integrations and orchestration across multiple platforms. And then it's how we then also link that with the business risk. So how do we ensure that the crown jewels are elevated in terms of risk and have that extra layer of protection? How do we ensure that the remediation and mitigation approach is correct? And it's got to be also associated with ensuring the ownership of that risk within the business is clearly understood. And how is that associated with the business? So the general approach that as we see it, is it's a phased approach, and the way we see it is really that we're looking. Phase one is really right now moving into phase two, where we're doing the detection and remediation. We're looking at the patch management, the configuration changes, the patchless protection, and we have an LLM that we have used for generating scripts, for example. So we're talking about AI generated fixes. It's a fairly simple approach, but it doesn't need to be any more complex. We're now moving towards phase two, which is where we're talking about exposure, detection, and remediation. So within the platform, we now have compliance auditing, and we're moving towards later in the year to not only have the compliance checking, but to have the automated compliance remediation. So it'll be where we have non-compliant systems, we'll be able to say, now go fix. And off we go. We'll also be looking towards integrating information around the MITRE framework and start to bring in how we can generate policies for this. Moving on to the future, this is where we then start to talk about, or even further to the future, this is when we then start to look at the orchestration across the platforms. So where we need to integrate the security stack, where we're bringing in those other tools, those other solutions, that we need to be able to audit the policies. We need to be able to enforce the policies and also have the AI performing that orchestration and making those configuration changes. So it may be if we have a printer that has vulnerabilities, we need to put in place some mitigation to prevent that being exploited. We can't patch it. What do we do? Maybe a change to a firewall. But this is where we're heading. So it's heading towards that automated approach in terms of using the AI to understand the environment as a whole and to manage and mitigate across multiple different platforms. So this is really where we see AI being the challenge, where we see things headed, and also where we see VRX as a platform headed. Now, I don't know if there was any questions up till this point, but what I was going to do from here, yeah, we're all good, are we? What I was going to do here was just very quickly show a brief demo of the platform as we have it, just so that you can see how we approach it and how easy it actually is. So just bear with me a moment. If I can persuade my, there we go. And I'll just keep this to a couple of minutes because I'd like to leave some time for any questions that we might have. So what I'm showing here is our dashboard that we present for managing all of the elements that I was talking about. And it's basically designed to give overview into the applications, assets, operating systems. And you can see we've got the risk level of those. You can also see down here, we have a breakdown of the CVEs and the vulnerabilities and the threats. So you can see we've identified a number of CVEs. So even this relatively small environment, we've got more than 1,000 vulnerabilities, only with 21 assets. This is the numbers challenge that I was talking about right at the beginning of the presentation. This is the challenge that we have. How do we take this number of vulnerabilities to do something meaningful with, to understand what's relevant? Even if you only look at the critical, the 62, that's a reasonable number, let alone if you bring in the high, when we then have almost 400. So what we're doing is we're taking these vulnerabilities to then prioritize. And this is the first stage that we will be expanding on and that we see as being core to the approach. So we will be releasing our version 2 of the risk analysis later in the year, where we'll start to bring in additional information. And this is where this is how we start to map onto the business and the business risk. And we manage this through, as I say, we take lots of different information around known exploited vulnerabilities, admin rights, active on the network, whether we have patches, social media activity. And this is what we use to generate the risk score. So you can see that we have high risk and medium risk. And this all of a sudden is a lot more manageable than trying to look at all of these CVEs. We can see these applications are high risk. And we can see more detail around all of these applications. So we can see very easily we have patches available. We have an analysis into why is it high risk. So we can see the details around the application to understand why is it high risk, as well as having information around the versions, the assets, and the vulnerabilities. And the CVEs, we've also got a breakdown into what are the CVEs, and we can drill down into more detail. In terms of actually patching, we can do this manually from this screen, or we can actually automate this. And this is the key thing, the automation. And this is where we then need to start bringing in the AI and the computer-assisted approach to the remediation. And we can very easily set up an automation for multiple applications. So we can say we want to update the selection of applications, and we want to apply the critical, high, and based on what I said, I'd actually like to apply all of those severity levels on a regular ongoing basis. We have auto reboot and user interaction options. I'll not go into that at the moment. And we can select assets or groups of assets, so you can deploy to different systems as needed, and you can do your scheduling, so you can set that up to run on a regular ongoing basis. And obviously we may want to do it on a daily basis for managing on a quicker basis, to manage those systems and get the patches out more quickly. But equally, we can do that on a weekly or a monthly. So in terms of Cyber Essentials, this is how we can show that what we're doing is patching those critical and high within the 14-day window as required. And once we've created that, we can then finish that off, and we can combine this with other activities. So we can add in scripting. Essentially, it's very, very flexible platform. I've touched on it very, very briefly. As I say, I didn't want to go into too much detail. I wanted to focus more on the AI side of things. But certainly, it's very simple platform to use, and so something that we can, Katie and I can go into more detail if it's anything that is of interest to any of you. But hopefully, you found all of that useful. And again, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but please do feel free to speak up, and I can hopefully cover those off.
Thank you so much, David. That was really helpful. And we have a couple of minutes left. I thought that was a really insightful webinar. And it did really strike the chord that AI is something that is, it's kind of happening now. And we're just waiting for that to see it then all the time in the news. And one question, feel free, everyone, please put your questions in the chat, or if you think of them after, email me. But one question I had was, how do security practitioners, how do we make the cases to organization lead, board level, that we need to start acting on this now, that it is, do you have any advice or tips on how we can kind of get stakeholder buy-in for this?
Well, I think the key thing is visibility. Now, I rarely speak to any customers who have complete confidence in knowing what applications they have out there. So the first thing is understanding you can't protect what you don't know about. And this is really the key thing. And the majority of people, hand on heart, when they think about it, they don't know what they've got. So that buy-in, yes, it needs to come from the top, but it's also got to have that visibility. So it's, as long as the management understand we have these gaps, this is probably the key. It's where's the gaps, what can we do to optimize it and keep the time / money / licensing down. So those are probably the key things that I would focus on. So certainly in terms of the platform, we consolidate licensing costs, for example, training costs, because you single platform, and provide the visibility, which I think very few people actually have.
That's a very good point. And we are close to wrapping up. So, there is something. Okay, yeah, there is one question, and there is a question in the question box from Instar. Is the patching very effective? I mean, to what extent do we trust or have enough? We trust we have enough defense against the expected AI attacks in the future? And I think that is a really good question. Can we trust the AI? How effective does it work?
So that's a really good question, and I think to answer that is really, it's with any remediation approach, to some degree, it's a numbers game. So to some degree, it's looking at the 80-20 rule, and the more you can do, the better. Is it ever going to be 100%? Probably not. But if you don't do anything, then you're completely exposed. That's generally how I would think. AI ideally will give an improved and enhanced view, and potentially may identify things that humans wouldn't, which is the direction you're going. But I would it's got to be a numbers game, 80-20.
That was a really good answer, and I hope that answered your question. We are now just going to wrap up because we've hit the time. I'm going to put a quick poll in the chat. If you could answer it, that would be amazing to help us really improve these webinars. At the same time, I wanted to thank David so much for this. It was really insightful, and I think it's it really does tackle a issue that we're going to see a lot more of. So thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for attending and spending your Tuesday. Yeah, it's Tuesday morning with
Yeah.
us. I hope you will have a very great day and look forward to seeing you at more webinars in the future, hopefully. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Katie.